Hi, I'm Jonathan Hassall. I'm an ADHD and executive function coach, and I'm here to cover the second half of our Spark session on decoding doing. And I'm going to talk about imagine. So why am I talking about imagination? Surely with ADHD, we know we've all got great imaginations. We're novel. We're very creative in our thinking. Well, the problem is that's true and that's great. However, we're not great at organizing that imagination. And what I'm going to show you today is how we need to organize that imagination in order to help us to act. So quickly recovering what Madeline told us earlier, we have the connect phase, which rolls on to imagining, which is what I'm going to talk about now, which in turn stimulates our motivation and then the action. And then once we've gotten through the real world problems associated with acting in the real world, we achieve. And in that achievement, we get to recognize what went right, but also what problems we came up against and what we want to change for the future. Now, I'm going to put to you that with ADHD, we react with the world predominantly emotionally, that most of what we do is driven by emotion. And with getting started on tasks, it's going to be either triggered by enthusiasm or threat most of the time. So what's that mean like for the SEMA code? Well, what it means is that connection, that automatic connection for doing it, either enthusiasm or threat, is going to drive directly through to the motivation. Yeah, we'll think briefly about how we're going to do it, but realistically, it's going to move to motivation and then action. And that action is going to suffer for it. So either we might struggle still to get started because we haven't got clear enough directions on how to start. But also too, we might get into it and realize that, oh, there's bits we were missing. So it's going to be hard to keep going. Or if there's enough of a threat, we'll keep going, but we'll do it very inefficiently. It'll take a lot of time and a lot of effort. It won't be quite the result we thought we could get. And at the end of it, we'll end up with the assessment that, well, that was hard and it wasn't particularly pleasant. So we want to change this. So let's go back to my statement a few seconds ago about how we're driven emotionally. Why would that be? So if we look at neural networks, and I'm going to talk about two of them today, there are more than this, but I'm going to talk about the default mode network, which is all about interacting with the world and predicting the immediate future. So for example, when we get an external trigger, we can then associate it with what we already know. Now, a little while ago, I had a red-bellied black snake crawl into my house. Beautiful animal, very timid, but also very poisonous. And I'm not particularly comfortable with snakes. So as a result, we got it rescued by a lovely little Steve Irwin clone, and he was nice and took it away. But after that, I found myself noticing that every long, skinny thing on the floor in that particular room made me think snake, and it gave me a little start. So that was a perfect example of I had a very strong emotional response to something. I interpreted it directly, like if I see something long and skinny, looks a bit like a snake, I'm going to think snake, which is going to be my automatic reaction, is very much an emotional one. The way we solve it, though, is we look at it. We turn on our attention. And as we turn on our attention, it turns down that emotional network, which means we stop making those associations. And instead, we look at the detail. And when we look at the detail, we can formulate a story based on new information, which we can then share back with our default mode network. So we have a new story. So every time I saw something long and skinny on the floor, I stopped, first checked it wasn't a snake, and then I picked it up. And if it was a belt, or if it was a tie, or if it was a guitar lead, I wrapped it up and put it away. And pretty soon, like literally the same day, I stopped seeing snakes and started seeing mess. So that's what we're talking about. Now with ADHD, we know we have trouble turning on that attentional or task positive network. It does turn on, but it doesn't turn on reliably. And we think that's related to our available dopamine. And we know there's lots of things that will affect availability of our dopamine. So if it doesn't turn on well, we stay in that emotional state, which means to activate to an emotional state means you need very strong emotions. The upside of that emotional state, though, is that we're really creative thinkers, as I mentioned earlier. So that means that we're great problem solvers. It means we are great at putting loose connections together. In fact, it's rare that we'll find that we can't do something or we're not doing something because we can't solve the problem of how to do it. So that's good. But there is a problem with organizing ourselves. And so if we don't organize how we're going to do it, or our planning or our imagining of it, then what happens is we end up with small delays. And these are worth noting because they're quite deceptive. So another quick story. When I was about 14, my parents bought myself and my three brothers skateboards. Interesting choice. But anyway, I loved that skateboard and I loved flying down the hill on it and everything was wonderful. But then one day I was flying down that hill and all of a sudden the skateboard stopped and threw me off. Now I went looking for this giant rock or crack in the concrete that must have thrown me. But when I went and looked, it was a tiny little pebble. Now, what had happened was there was enough force of me pushing the skateboard to go faster against the concrete that I was riding on in the road. And this little pebble just happened to be hard enough to resist both of it. So as we hit it, something had to give, and that was me being thrown off the top of the skateboard. Now, I like this analogy because it describes what happens with ADHD. It's not the big things that will delay us and stop us. It's the little things. It'll be, oh, I don't have that form at hand. I know where I can get it, but I just don't have it right now. Oh, I can't find a pen right now. Oh, I'm not sure how I was going to start that. I know I can figure it out, but I just don't know how to do it right now. Now, these little delays are enough to slow us down and stop us. Now, where other people would stop, redirect, solve that little delay, and then go back to the task, for that, somehow that feels a lot more uncomfortable for us. So what that means is, instead of saying, I can't, because we know we can solve most things, we say, not now. And that's more dangerous because not now means later. Well, when's later? We know the relationship we have with time. Later or tomorrow might be never. It's just not now. So this is the way we often get delayed. And often get delayed, and then we get caught into time shifting, which means that we don't tend to get stuff going. And probably importantly, we don't stop and solve that first problem that stopped us getting there. So I want you to take a spark moment here. So take a moment to think about the last time you procrastinated. Now, with what we've just talked about already, I want you to think, what does that make me realize about that experience for me? Okay, I'll see you in a minute. So how did you go? Now let's look at the next step, how we're going to organize our imagination. Now, Madeline gave us a great little tool with organize, notice, analyze, choose, and we're going to use that tool. But the other thing we've got to think about is that when we're going into imagining how we're going to do it, we need to actually have a bit more detail. So we could use a little bit of structure there as well. So the type of structure we need to think about is the stages we have to go through or the aspects we have to consider to make sure that the action will work. The first one is the process. So how we're going to do it. What steps do we actually have to do to make the thing happen? The second one are the resources that will fuel that process. So obviously time is always one of them, but it might also include money, skills, other people, etc. And then the context. So how is this going to work in our life? We've got to make sure that there's room for these processes to happen to give this outcome within our life. Otherwise, it's not likely to happen. So let's look at process first, and let's apply the notice, analyze, choose, and let's notice the process. So first, with any process, we've got to figure out, well, hang on, what are we doing this for? What's our target outcome? Now, Madeline talked a lot about the emotional context of that. I want to focus more on what are the actual measurable outcomes. So in other words, what are the measurable criteria that are going to give us the outcome that we imagined? So for example, if I want to buy a new car, then I have to decide what are the criteria that will help me make that choice. One of the criteria might be I have to like it. Well, that's a personal objective, subjective criteria. But the other ones might be it has to have so many seats in it, it has to have such mileage, it has to be within a price range, whatever. But we're going to have really measurable items that are going to tell us that that task is done. And that's an important point about that too. It also helps us know when we're finished. Then once we've got that, we build the steps to deliver those measurable criterias. Notice we're delivering the steps to the criterias, not to the emotional connection of why we're doing it and the value we're seeing in it. So by doing that, we have to create a list of actions that are going to help each of those criteria realize. And the best way of doing that is to get it outside of our head. In other words, write it down. So we write it down for two main reasons. One, because yeah, it's a great way of capturing everything and we can see it, which takes a great load off our working memory. But the other thing is that as we write stuff down, it'll prompt us to think of other things we might not have just thought of in our head because we can see it on the page. So when we analyze that, we want to check, is it simple enough? Have I made sure I've got every step, but also too, are they broken down enough that I can both feel that it's an easy step through and also too, that I can make it easier to estimate time, which we'll talk about a bit in the resources. A good measure of it being simple enough is that you could give it to somebody else and they could follow that list and do it. How accessible is it? And this is a working memory thing. So we've just said that, you know, our working memory can struggle with capacity. So we've got to make it easily accessible in the moment. So have we got it written down somewhere? Is it a checklist? Is it simple enough? I don't need that. But I would encourage you to think, if it's anything that you're struggling to activate to do, get it out of your head in a checklist that you can refer to externally. And last but not least, to analyze it, visualize yourself moving through the process. Let's error test it. Does it work? Okay. Finally, once we've decided and we've seen it, choose it. Commit to that process. And again, having it written as a checklist on a page is a great way of committing. So, how have you approached your processes in the past? I want you to have a think about that in relation to what we just talked about, and then make some notes about what that makes you realize about yourself and about the way you've approached process in the past. I'll see you in a minute. Okay, welcome back. So hope you did well with that. Hope you captured those thoughts in your journal. Now, the resources, what will fuel my process? So obviously there's tools that we may need to do something, and these are all administrative tools, but you could also have power tools. You could have people, would be another thing that you might need. You can also have time, as we said, and that'd be the time that each task is going to take. So these are all resources that we need to make sure that we have available to us so that we can get the process done. So let's notice the resources. So first, visualize each step, which is what we just did as the last step of the analyzing the process. And as you're doing it, notice what you're using. Actually see yourself and say, well, what do I need? Oh, that's right, I need the keys to drive the car. look for things like time, people, places, things, money, knowledge, all that sort of stuff. So think of yourself as needing to be really tooled up, and what tools do you have and what tools don't you have? So then analyze it. Do I have everything or enough of everything? Because often we jump into tasks, no, we've got some of the stuff, but we might not have enough wood to finish that project, which will mean it's going to interrupt the process. So maybe I want to sit down and really make sure that I've got everything I need before I start. Have I captured that list of resources outside of my head, including time, which should be in a diary or a planner? But also, have I got a shopping list that I need to take to get things? Will it be accessible before I start? Now, this is a big problem with ADHD, that often we will sort of start thinking I can pick it up or find it as I go. And the reality is we often can't. It's not as accessible as we would have liked it to have been. So once we've decided what our resources are and we've made a list of them, let's commit to gathering those resources, making sure we get them before we attempt the task. So last time you approached resourcing your tasks, what was that like? And given what we've just spoken about, what do you now realize? I'll see you in a minute. Okay, I hope you captured some great insights there about yourself. Finally, context. How will this fit in my life? Well, the reality is we've got to make sure that it's going to fit in with our energy levels, our available money, things we've got to do, and other people in our life. So we have to keep it in perspective and make sure that it's not only the time the task will take, but it's also the time you have to give. So let's notice, what else have you got going on? Now, a really simple way I have doing that is to think of the major domains of life: my health or self-care, my relationships, my productivity, which includes play and work, and also how my resources, money, energy, and time. So just notice what's already being taken up for that. Then when you analyze it, look at it in the context of order of priority. So, okay, I've got this new thing I'm wanting to do. How important is that? And what's the priority in terms of all the other things that I'm doing? And just an important note there, that when we think about importance, we're not talking about the emotional value of it. What we're talking about is the order in which things need to happen to have the best outcome for you. So obviously, if you're not taking care of your health, it's going to have an impact on you delivering on other things. So we have to make sure that we're figuring out that in that context, not just in the emotional context of what we think is more valuable. We have to think about the impact that this task may have on other commitments. And is there any give there? Or in other words, what do I have to spare? And finally, we need to choose to commit to a balanced life, so we can make sure that it's not only going to happen, but it feels like it's right to happen. So take a minute and think about if you've created context and balance in the past, and what have you now realized that we've talked about it. I'll see you in a minute. All right, welcome back. Well done. That's finished off the Imagine section of Decoding Doing. Now it's time to go to your breakout groups and get sparking on sharing your own wisdom and ideas about how you're going to incorporate this in your life. Thanks very much for your time.